Free agency underway. Tampering has happened. Deals are not yet official, but we've got a ton of news to go through from day one and now day two of free agency around the NFL. The Bears, the Raiders, the Falcons making big moves and a lot of dollars being divvied out. But to the big men, Matt, so far in free agency on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks to everybody for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Apologies for my voice. Trying to get through some sickness here that's happening for me, but man, it was a nice little sick day for me yesterday. I didn't do a lot except for just watch deals happen all through the NFL with day one of the tampering period in free agency. And, you know, it's funny because legal tampering starts and 1 minute they've got these contract details hammered out. Matt, I think there's some illegal tampering that happens as well around the I think agents might talk to each other quite a bit here before the tampering period starts. But I think the way I want to start this thing is just overall big picture, Matt. We're seeing a lot of offensive linemen, defensive linemen making big money on the first day of free agency, and not a lot of little guys, not a lot of fantasy football producers, not a lot of wide receivers. In fact, I think we had our first wide receiver signing Tuesday. It's looking like Jacoby Myers going from the New England Patriots to the Las Vegas Raiders to play with and catch passes from the guy who made the most money on a per-year basis on day one of free agency, that being former Patriot and former San Francisco 49er Jimmy Garoppolo going to the Las Vegas Raiders on a 3-year, $72.75 million contract.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, we know that it's not a great wide receiver class, and I don't think anybody wanted to set the market there, and Myers, I think, is the best of the group. It's not a great tight end class. You know, Ingram was franchised. The running backs, you aren't ever going to go quickly, but the best ones are already franchised. So like the fantasy relevant guys haven't really had their day yet. And I'm sure that they'll start to trickle in here over the next 24, 48 hours or whatever. Big picture, I feel like a lot of solid starters, good players are getting too much money, frankly, as is always the case in day one. You know, they're getting big contracts, you know, like your boy McGlinchey's a perfect example. Like, he's a good run blocker. He's a quality right tackle, but he's not great. You know, he's okay in protection, and he's getting big money because he's the best available. I mean, and that's the way things go. But I do want to talk Jimmy and the Raiders, and a handful of teams I think are really relevant, but I think you're burying the lead too. I mean, new poster boy of the show, Javon Hargrave, and his shake and his cake or whatever it is coming to your hometown as a big money dude. I'm just hoping you can get to a practice.
Well, look, man, the 49ers, they might have already had the most caked up offensive player in the NFL in Deebo Samuel. Now they get the most caked up defensive player in the league and Javon Hargrave. That one blew me away. I was shocked when I saw Javon Hargrave going to the San Francisco 49ers, 4-year, $84 million contract, and looking at some of the structure today that's come out from that deal. And it's actually pretty team friendly for the 49ers, but keeping a strength. And he's a perfect fit for what the 49ers need to do. They need somebody who can take on blocks inside. He has a history as a nose tackle, but can also pressure quarterbacks and push the pocket and, hit gaps and be a guy that generates pressure, coming off a career high 11 sacks for him last year. That's exactly what the 49ers need on the interior next to Eric Armstead. And really kind of, it's funny because they're admitting defeat with the DeForest Buckner trade in some ways, because they actually gave him the exact dollars, 4 years, 84, that DeForest Buckner got a few years ago after they traded him to the Indianapolis Colts. And with that first round draft pick they got, they drafted a guy who hasn't been able to stay on the field, has been really inconsistent, and Javon Kinlaw, who probably drops down to a reserve role now, or maybe is even on the trade market.
Yeah, and I love the pickup. I mean, to keep a strength of strength, they want to rush for. Their interior run defenders aren't great. It's a great D line, but the interior run defenders are just okay, and he'll help that for sure. There's much more to talk about, but I love the signing. The only slight caveat is he's already 30 years old. I mean, he came to the league a little older than people realize. So, I mean, you're buying at a high point, but they're in it to win it.
Yeah, and looking at the contract structure on that one, we're seeing here on Tuesday now some of the deals on Monday and seeing how some of the numbers look. That's really it's a 2-year, $40 million about guaranteed contract, then 2 more years of around $20 million per year for Javon Hargrave. So the 49ers after 2 years can get out of the contract if they want to, or it kind of goes year to year for them in years 3 and 4 for him. And yeah, he's not the youngest guy in the world. So, after 2 years, I think it's structured in a really great way where the 49ers, if, they can't fit it under the cap or need to restructure it because there's no more guarantees left on it or need to trade him or, need to cut him or whatever, they can do that after 2 years. So it's good, fantastic in that regard for the 49ers.
So you want to go to Raiders then? I mean, you mentioned Jimmy and Myers.
Let me ask you this question because Jacoby Myers gets a 3-year, $33 million contract. If my math is correct, that's $11 million per year. Jimmy Garoppolo got the biggest dollar amount once free agency got going here with $24.25 million per year on his deal with the Raiders, which is also a deal that is sort of stopgappy. And really, Jimmy Garoppolo has become one of the first. We had talked about it on the podcast here. There's not really there's not a middle class of quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the first real true middle class starting quarterback contracts we've seen in free agency with Jimmy Garoppolo getting just a little over $20 million per year. He's not getting the $37.5 million that Derek Carr got or the $40 million a year that Daniel Jones got, even though those contracts look a little bit different as well when you get deep into the structure. So interesting there. It allows the Las Vegas Raiders to do what they need to. He can be a stopgap. You can draft a quarterback this year. You can draft a quarterback next year. You can do a lot of things here. So I like it for the Raiders because I think it leaves them some flexibility to build this roster how they want. And of course, Josh McDaniels, who's coached Jimmy Garoppolo before, knows he can run his system and believes he can start to put his plan in place there in Las Vegas.
Yeah, and obvious Patriot ties, of course. Real quick on Myers, very good player. A little redundant with Renfrow, though. I wonder if Renfrow could be on the way out, possibly, or field and trades for him. It just seems I didn't see that signing coming. I kind of thought they were fine at that spot, but a good pickup. And you nailed it with Jimmy. I think Jimmy's perfect for this team in that you're not picking in the top 4. You're not guaranteed a quarterback. You probably can just stay put, and if your guy is there, you take him. If not, you wait a year, and you're fine. My only problem with that, of course, is Jimmy's durability. You're kind of counting on him to be on the field. He needs to prove he can do that. That's my only, problem with the signing, but none of these guys are perfect. And really, is Jimmy that much different than who you played with last year and Derek Carr? Not much,
That was going to be my question, and I've got one of these with the Chicago Bears as well for the Las Vegas Raiders. So both Derek Carr and Jimmy Garoppolo, around 31 years old. They were both part of that 2014 draft class, both second-round picks in 2014. Derek Carr got 4 years, $150 million, $37.5 million per year from the New Orleans Saints. And would you rather have Carr at that deal? And I think most people would rank Carr ahead of Jimmy Garoppolo as far as NFL quarterbacks go, even if they're in the same tier. And Jimmy Garoppolo gets 3 years, $72.75 million, which is about, $13-14 million less per year than Derek Carr. So which deal do you like better for the Raiders?
Yeah, I think it's close to a wash, but apparently Carr, I don't want to say they didn't get along, but they obviously mutually decided that this wasn't a good marriage. And so you go get a similar caretaker type, caretaker plus. I guess I'd rather have Jimmy for the money. I mean, I do think Carr is a slightly better player, but you don't lose much. You know what I mean? I mean, it's a pretty much a lateral move.
Raiders also brought in Marcus Epps, safety from the Philadelphia Eagles, 2 years, $12 million, and Jarrett Stidham leaves Las Vegas and heads to the Denver Broncos. So a lot of quarterback movement here with Josh McDaniels' Las Vegas Raiders. Jarrett Stidham leaves, the guy that took over for Derek Carr at the end of the season. He leaves for Denver to be Russell Wilson's backup, 2 years, $10 million contract there with the Denver Broncos, who were very active. We'll talk more about the Denver Broncos on this podcast as well. In fact, we'll do that next. We'll talk Bears. Right. We'll talk Denver Broncos, who made some big moves, and Atlanta Falcons. I think the three most active teams in free agency so far to start the 2023 free agency off season. Next. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It is getting down to it in the NBA season, and man, the NBA season's weird because it starts so slow, and a lot of people say NBA season doesn't start until Christmas, and some people say NBA season doesn't really start until after the All-Star game, and it's weird how these NBA players can turn it off and turn it on. And there's a lot of load management happening in the NBA, but things are getting very serious in the NBA, and now is the perfect time for you to download the FanDuel app, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from money line to point scorers to three-pointers drained. Of course, the NCAA tournament is coming up as well. Plus, FanDuel lets you combine your bets for a better chance at a bigger payout with same-game parlays. Of course, you can bet on NFL futures and draft props as well at FanDuel. Tons of other sports, Major League Baseball getting going. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. How about this one for an A versus B? Very interesting development for the Chicago Bears so far in free agency, Matt. And they had some contract negotiations with Roquan Smith, star linebacker. They didn't get anything done. They ended up trading him at the deadline for a second-round pick. And then once free agency comes around, and it made sense because we're still building it. We don't have the guys up front to take on blocks and keep him free. And we're building this thing slowly. But all of a sudden, free agency comes around, and then they end up spending just about as much money on a linebacker. So now Tremaine Edmunds leaves Buffalo. He's still not even 25 years old, which is crazy for Tremaine. Yeah. He was so young coming out of the NFL draft. I think he was a 17-year-old college starter, which is kind of right. Wild. Yeah. But Tremaine Edmunds gets a 4-year, $72 million contract, $18 million per year. Roquan got a little bit more money, and the Bears got a second-round pick out of this. So what do you like? Tremaine Edmunds for 4 years, 72, or you pay a little more, and a second-round pick, or would you rather have the better linebacker in Roquan Smith?
Yeah, and I've heard this brought up a lot, and there's some variables that we don't know. I mean, it takes two sides to get a contract done. Was Roquan not real interested? Did he want out? Who the heck knows? That was 4 months ago or whatever. I mean, times change, and you didn't know that Edmunds and Edwards were necessarily even going to hit the market. You knew that their contracts were up, but it's not quite apples to apples. But you did pick up the second-round pick, which was great. I think Roquan's the better player, and I think Edwards is also a nice player as well. But history shows the team that spends big dollars on off-the-ball linebackers in free agency usually regrets it. We'll see. I think Edmunds is an ascending player. You mentioned his youth. But I also need to realize, too, Eberflus is the defensive coordinator there. And going back to Indianapolis, a huge, huge key for him with Leonard and Bobby Okereke and those guys is length at linebacker. He loves those long guys that just clog up zones, and nobody's longer than Edmunds. And I like what the Bears did, but if you take a step back, it's like, okay, you spent big money on off-the-ball linebackers and a guard. They're not the hardest things to find.
Yeah, very interesting there because you came in thinking, okay, they're going to hit defensive tackle, they're going to hit edge, they're going to hit offensive tackle, and they came out of day one with two off-ball linebackers, Tremaine Edmunds, 4 years, $72 million, and TJ Edwards as well from Philly to Chicago, 26-year-old linebacker, 3 years, $19.5 million, so that's $6.5 million. So they get their linebacking group together here in free agency, and then they bring in guard Nate Davis, who's a really good player, a really sort of an unknown player around the league. I don't think people realize how good he is. 3 years, $30 million. So $10 million a year for a guard, which tells me they probably, and then they also brought in DeMarcus Walker as well, defensive end from Tennessee. And we don't have the numbers yet on that one. It's for the Chicago Bears, it's really telling what they're not signing to me, because either they're striking out, maybe they went hard after Hargrave, and Hargrave says, well, same money, I'm going to go play for a team that has a better chance to win the Super Bowl. Maybe that's what happened there in some of these negotiations. I think they were in on Mike McGlinchey. Maybe they tapped out at some point. You talked about how, maybe maybe you got too much anyway. So maybe that's good that they're avoiding some of these bad contracts. And we're seeing, the sort of, second tier of players like McGlinchey. He's not a star offensive tackle, but he's getting big time money. And you're seeing Zach Allen and some of these other guys getting $15 million per year. Maybe that's better that the Bears aren't getting involved. And so, but maybe they also are looking at the draft thinking, well, we know we're going to get either a stud defensive tackle, stud edge, or an offensive tackle with that 9th pick in the draft. So we're not going to overpay for those positions because we're in a good spot to go get one of those guys. And with all these second-round picks and other picks we have, you can get a lot of these defensive tackles and a lot of players in the draft that way. So maybe that's why they're doing what they're doing at some maybe not quite as high-value positions as we expected from the Bears in free agency.
Very possible. And, the state of their roster, they need starters. And they added 3 or 4 quality starters, not to mention DJ Moore, who's, I love that trade from where Chicago is. I just question a little bit of
that's the star that they've added. That was the big addition so far. He's awesome.
Yeah, that's no doubt. So should we talk Denver a little bit? They're kind of crazy too.
Yes, absolutely. Let's talk Denver Broncos here, who have made a ton of moves, kind of some surprising moves. I mean, you're spending $5 million on a backup quarterback. That was kind of a weird signing for Jarrett Stidham and the Denver Broncos. Zach Allen, I mentioned, Arizona Cardinals defensive end, gets almost $16 million per year, 3 years, $47.75 million contract. Guard Ben Powers goes from Baltimore to Denver, 4 years, $51 million. Draymond Jones, who apparently was somebody that the Seahawks asked for in the Russell Wilson trade, so they just ended up signing him in free agency anyway. So Draymond Jones, the Denver Broncos lose in free agency to the Seattle Seahawks, and then they signed Mike McGlinchey at right tackle for one of the biggest deals so far on the offensive line. 5 years, $87.5 million, $17.5 million per year for Mike McGlinchey, and a few other minor deals as well.
I think it's a slight overpay on Zach Allen, but I get it. He's an ascending player. I would rather have Draymond Jones. I mean, Jones maybe would rather play in Seattle, but it's not a 1-for-1 replacement, but they're both undersized upfield defensive tackles, big defensive end types. But I think the offense is where we need to pay attention here too. As you mentioned Stidham, and that's a little under the radar, but I know people around the league respect him and think that he's not a bum, and I just look at the offensive moves and say, boy, Russ isn't going to throw the ball a whole heck of a lot. I mean, you go get McGlinchey, who's, better than anyone, is a very good run blocker, not so great in protection. Ben Powers is an old school 350-pound guard, and they're good starters, not great, but you have almost $140 million tied up in the two of them. I mean, just for 2 starting offensive linemen. And then you go get a big blocking tight end and Chris Manhertz. I mean, they're going to run the ball, is what they're telling you. I mean, John Payton said,
they're going to run the ball, action, and when they do throw the ball, I think they're going to try to get the ball out quick. Now, that's not really been Russell Wilson's MO, but it has been Sean Payton's MO throughout his coaching career. And Mike McGlinchey's not a great fit for a quarterback that wants to hold on to the ball a long time and create plays and go deep into the play, because as you mentioned, pass blocking is not, he's an okay pass blocker, good run blocker, really good run blocker. But he wouldn't be the right fit for that reason, I kind of didn't like him for either the Bears or the Broncos, because he's not the guy you want for a quarterback that's going to be holding the ball a long time. And so interesting. Don't really love the value of some of the signings that the Denver Broncos have made, but really interesting. And I think you nailed it, kind of putting the pieces together on what the offense might look like. And I think some big changes for the Broncos in that regard, which are much needed. All the other stuff too, with there was the story about his own personal coaches that aren't going to be there anymore. He had office hours in his own office in the facility or something like that. So Sean Payton coming in is like, yeah, okay, Russ, it's not the Russell Wilson show here anymore. This is my show. We're going to do things much differently than they were last year.
I just think this is further evidence that Russ is going to have to adapt to Peyton, not the other way around.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, next, let's get into some of the other biggest deals that happened in free agency. Atlanta Falcons making a lot of moves and some more dollars being spent by other teams around the NFL. Next. Today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar, and March Madness is here, right? And so that means it's also time for Built Bar March Madness. We've got brackets for the best flavors of Built Bars. Either the traditional Built Bars, Built Bar Puffs are involved as well. And we know you have a favorite flavor of Built Bar or Puff. And now's your time to make it count. Go to builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. I love the traditional peanut butter flavor. I know a lot of people really love the marshmallowy puff flavors of Built Bars. And Matt, I don't know, what is the Williamson family? What's the number one Built Bar flavor that the Williamson family would be voting for in the Built Bar Madness bracket?
I got to tell you, I mean, they come regularly to the house, and my 16-year-old, who's now taller than I am, he's almost 6'4", and hitting the weights and playing volleyball every day. I never even see them. They like vanish the second they show up here. He just devours them or takes them to his room, and I find an empty box the next day.
Well, he's getting so tall.
Doesn't even matter. Yeah.
All that protein
Exactly.
in the Built Bars is doing young Williamson very well. Low sugar, low calories, high in protein. That's what you're getting with Built Bars, and tons of great flavors. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you will be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, one Locked On fan will get a 12-month subscription to Built and have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. So you got to try Built Bars, and you got to vote for your favorite flavor of Built Bars. BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote, and go to built.com as well to find your favorite flavors. You can vote every day in March, so hop on in and support your favorite flavors of Built Bars. Okay, here we go, Matt. Let's get into some of the nitty gritty here. Let's focus on the Atlanta Falcons really quick, because they've been busy. They did some deals before the tampering period became legal, and they made more deals after the tampering became legal. They traded for Jonnu Smith at tight end and signed Jesse Bates, top safety on the market, 4 years, $64 million. That's $16 million per for Jesse Bates on the back end to starts to look like a pretty good secondary there with AJ Terrell as well in Atlanta. Caden Ellis, outside linebacker, goes from the New Orleans Saints to the Atlanta Falcons, 3 years, $21.5 million. They signed Taylor Heineke, which makes me feel like their quarterback situation is done, right?
I don't know what to think of that. Yeah.
3 years, $14 million. That's a backup contract. And it sounds like he's your backup just in case Desmond Ridder, who's going to go in as the starting quarterback, third-round rookie last year, and maybe battle it out a little bit. But, just in case Ridder's not the guy, you have Taylor Heineke as your backup quarterback, and they signed fullback Keith Smith as well, re-signed fullback Keith Smith, keeping him in Atlanta on a 1-year contract. But the quarterback one's interesting because I got to believe, and the reports were they weren't in on Lamar Jackson. I think this kind of solidifies it for me. But maybe I'm reading this wrong.
I didn't know what to think of that either. I think Heineke's a fine backup. Could Ridder end up in Baltimore? I don't know. I mean, I didn't want to look too much into that, in terms of Lamar. Maybe they're out on Lamar. Maybe Lamar's, too hard to deal with right now. And you're not even supposed to be talking to him until Wednesday anyway. And he doesn't have an agent. So
that's true.
And maybe it's just more of a pain in the butt than anybody wants to deal with. I don't know.
He's the hardest guy to illegally tamper with in the NFL
right now. Right. You have to bump into him at Starbucks or something.
Yeah, because the agents can back channel all day long. If you don't have an agent, you can't back channel because you definitely can't contact an actual player. Makes it
right. It's bizarro. But some familiarity here, though. I like what Atlanta did. Jonnu Smith played with Coach Smith, and another 6'5" guy. Great. I mean, fine. They didn't give hardly anything up for him. But the two guys, the defense needed everything, in my opinion, and they addressed all three levels right up the middle: defensive tackle, off the ball linebacker, a safety. The Onyemata and Ellis are both underrated quality players. They've spent a lot of time with the Saints, know the division. They've played against them, game playing against these guys. Bates will be the leader of the defense. I mean, so I think this team's trending the right direction.
Taking a look at some of the other bigger deals around the NFL that we haven't talked about yet. Jawan Taylor, right tackle for the Jacksonville Jaguars, going to the Kansas City Chiefs, Matt. 4 years, $80 million. Is he going to flip to the left side? Is this a sign that Orlando Brown Jr. is gone?
I think Orlando Brown Jr. is gone, and there's some rumblings that they're still talking to the Texans about Tunsil. I think the Chiefs handled this well, though. Taylor is an ascending player. I think he's only 24, maybe 25 years old. Getting better. And they already planted that left tackle seed there because they have Nwang, who's only a right tackle, not an ideal guy. Taylor's a much better player than him. But sitting there at 31, there's a chance, a tackle is on the board and Taylor could be your left or he could be your right, or maybe you get a Tunsil deal done. So I like it. I mean, I know some people were critical. You're going to give this guy $4 million, 4 years, $80 million, and tell him to change positions. What are you thinking? I don't know that he will be a left tackle. We'll see.
And actually getting more than Mike McGlinchey per year. McGlinchey got the 5-year deal, so the total dollars are more, but Jawaan Taylor getting $20 million per on his 4-year contract. Still only 25 years is Jawaan Taylor as well. Really had a nice year last year, protecting the non-blind side of Trevor Lawrence there in Jacksonville. Dalvin Tomlinson, he goes to he goes from the Minnesota Vikings to the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland Browns pretty active as well. 4 years, $57 million. Here's another one of those where it's like, okay, he's a big interior defensive tackle. He's not, a high-end pass rusher, getting $14.25 million per year. I guess that's the going rate. But to me, I'd rather pay the top guys $20 million than this tier in that $15 million range.
Yeah, I don't love the numbers on that, but I do like the 3 moves the Browns made. They brought back Ethan Posich, who's had a really, really good year for them. And one of my sleepers was Okoronkwo, the edge player. He's a good complement to Myles Garrett. But Tomlinson's the big ticket item. And their defensive tackles were probably the worst in the league last year. I mean, they were really soft up the middle. So a player like this is really required for them. The dollars might not be great, but, they are addressing needs, to say the least. And I don't know if you realize this, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they restructured Deshaun Watson's contract already and freed up like $30 million to do these deals. I think he's like a $68 million cap hit next year. And he really wasn't very good for them yet. He's an enormous, unprecedented cap hit going forward. He better be good.
The restructure game in the NFL is getting pretty wild.
It's insanity.
It's just almost every contract just gets restructured now. And how many cans can you kick down the road? It's getting right. Especially when the money's guaranteed. I guess you're going to pay it at some point. Might as well pay it in 2020, 2035, whatever. So yeah, interesting what's happening there. I'm glad you mentioned Okoronkwo, who is a player.
Yeah, I like him. Yeah,
out of Oklahoma in the draft. And he kind of reminds me a little bit of the guy in Philly who was drafted by the Arizona Cardinals.
Reddick, yeah.
Reddick, who's kind of, smaller. You don't know what to do with him. Is he an edge player? He plays like an edge, but he's built more like an off-ball linebacker. Samson Ebukam is kind of a similar guy where it takes those guys a little while to get going in their career, and teams don't trust them as pure edge players. But I think, getting a start later, some injuries earlier on in his career, I think a guy who can get after the quarterback there in sort of a stand-up rusher role. I think he's a pure edge guy. More so than a linebacker. 3 years, $19 million, $6 million plus per year. I like him as a player that can get after the quarterback a little bit if he's used correctly, and we'll see if the Cleveland Browns do use him correctly. But an under the radar signing that I do like for the Browns.
Yeah, last nugget on him too is, they kept giving him more and more in Houston, and he really absorbed full-time type of guy. And you got to think about it. I mean, he didn't have a lot of opportunities to rush the passer with a lead in Houston. You're losing. I mean, the fourth quarter, you're down 10. You're not winning by 10. So I think this was a real good pickup for the Brownies.
Is this a net gain for the Tennessee Titans to lose Nate Davis and then add Andre Dillard on a very similar deal? 3 years, just about $10 million per year. Dillard sort of, didn't really hit as that athletic left tackle. Some people called him soft. He doesn't, he's not a glass eater. I don't know if that's going to really fly with Mike Vrabel over there in Tennessee, but the Titans get themselves, I think maybe for a similar deal, maybe a net loss there going from Nate Davis to Andre Dillard.
Dillard's a tough guy to comment on because they lucked or, Mulata just overtook him, and Dillard did very little run blocking in college. I mean, he actually played a little bit of guard this past year for the Eagles as well. I don't know. I mean, I would not be super confident if I were the Titans to say, oh, we got our left tackle. I wouldn't be on that board, but he'll probably be one of their starting 5 somewhere.
A couple other big names that aren't long-term deals, but Jason Kelce decides he's coming back for another year. He's going to be back on a 1-year, $14 million contract with the Philadelphia Eagles, taking a shot of tequila with Howie Roseman to celebrate there on social media. I saw Robert Woods signs a 2-year contract with the Houston Texans, 2 years, $15 million. Give
Houston some credit, though. They're starting to build a team full of how many years in a row have the Texans gotten $1 million free agents and brought in 50 of them? I mean, at least they're
none of the top free agents. Nobody wants to really go there. So they're just
right.
like, yeah, we'll just take the leftovers, I get, and see if we can patch together a team.
I mean, Shaq Mason, Jimmy Ward, Robert Woods, all their best days are behind them, but they're at least going to be good culture guys and they can still play. And I mean, they're at least trying to build something there in Houston and not just totally tank it and sign a bunch of nobodies,
Yeah, it's sort of under the radar there. They didn't spend a lot to get a guy who's, when he's healthy, a starting caliber wide receiver in Robert Woods, or a starting caliber safety in Jimmy Ward, or trading for Shaq Mason to be a starting guard for them on their offensive line. And so just kind of building the guts of that team out a little bit more. And you got to like the direction things are going for the Houston Texans. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Patrick Peterson, another big name on the move, going to your Pittsburgh Steelers, Matt. 2 years, $14 million. Does he have 2 more years in the tank at 33 years old?
That I don't know. I think they wanted to retain Sutton, and Lions fans, you'll be very happy with Cam Sutton. He does everything well, kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. And then they pivoted and got Peterson. I've written many articles about the Steelers going into free agency, people they should target. And Peterson was on my list for 2 reasons. First of all, 32, 33-year-old corners historically do not play well. I mean, usually they fall off a cliff at that point, unless you're Champ Bailey, Darrell Green. But Peterson's kind of on that level in terms of freakiness and, Hall of Fame credentials. And I thought he was excellent for the Vikings last year. Despite their struggles, it was not his problem. I wouldn't blow me away. No one else has mentioned this, but he's 220 pounds. I mean, it's a 2-year deal. They can get out of it after 1. He could make this move to safety easily. I mean, his biggest role here, though, is they're going to draft a corner high, and he's going to be the mentor. I mean, that's how things work around here. Add another leader. He'll hang out with Cam and Minka and, be the leader here and teach the first-round corner what it is to be a Steeler,
So you're mocking corners all day to the Steelers in round 1?
Well, they have 3 early picks. They have 32 and 49. One of those 3, I promise you, will be a corner.
Miami Dolphins active as well.
Yeah.
There was the big Jalen Ramsey trade that we talked about yesterday. They added backup quarterback Mike White from the New York Jets on a 2-year, $8 million contract. Linebacker David Long from Tennessee, 2 years, $11 million contract. Re-signed Raheem Mostert. Added another linebacker, Duke Riley, as well, 2-year, $5 million contract.
Very aggressive, in it to win it. Said the same thing about Ramsey. These moves further exemplify that. White's a nice backup, for Tua, considering his situation. Back to the Steelers real quick. I was brokenhearted to see David Long, 2 years, $11 million. I mean, that's my favorite signing of anyone this year. That Fangio defense puts a lot of stress on their linebackers, and now they have 2 that can really run and cover ground, and Long and Baker. I think that was one of the best contracts any team signed this year.
Love Mike White there, $4 million a year as a backup. It's not one of those $8-10 million backup contracts, so it's good money, and you've got to have somebody behind Tua that can start some games for you potentially. And one fewer quarterback in New York, so we'll see. We still don't have any clarification, but maybe Wednesday when the new league year begins, Matt, we'll get some huge news on quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson or Aaron Rodgers. Will they be staying at their old homes? Will they be in new homes potentially? And those storylines are going to continue all offseason long until they get figured out. Some more signings around the NFL as well that Matt and I will have you covered. Thanks everybody for making us your first.
One last Aaron Rodgers nugget, if you don't mind, BP. I mean, what I keep reading, all the blurbs today on Tuesday. Oh, the Jets are interested in Lazard. Oh, the Jets are interested in Randall Cobb. I just read right before we hit record, they may sign Mercedes Lewis. Like, are you just
Jordy Nelson's coming out of retirement.
Right. Exactly. Like, oh boy, you guys aren't hiding anything. I mean,
that's a very clear one. Now you just need Aaron to say, cool, I'll just trade me to the Jets already. So we'll see.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. And Jordy Nelson's coming with me. Yeah.
Thanks for making us your first listen. Check out everything else the network has to offer. Locked On NFL Draft, and your team is covered every single day. Matt and I back tomorrow. Peacock and Williamson.